direct quote from today's guest on the Restaurant Incubator. I never had a coach that was in the office during the game. So, Jeremy Walton is with us today. His career reads like a playbook for building hospitality concepts that last. He spent 25 years in food and beverage leadership with some of the most respected names in luxury hospitality, Auberge Resorts, Montage, Sea Island, before bringing that experience to Alice Beach, Florida, where he served as vice president of resort operations. In Alice Beach, Jeremy helped shape culinary landmarks like Kalitza, Neat, and the Beach Club, but his most ambitious projects have been the ones he's done on his own recently as an entrepreneur, The Citizen, Fonville Press, and now Scout. So we talk all about this. We range all over. We hit the nuts and bolts that you need to know about building culture, what to pay for, what are the big expenses to buy when it comes to design, how to incorporate ergonomics into your restaurant build out, and much, much more. This is the Restaurant Incubator. My name is Brandon Sharp. I'm the host here. As an executive chef, I earned 7 Michelin stars. And now as an entrepreneur and owner, I have 3 restaurants here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm sitting at Hawthorne and Wood right now. We also have Bluebird. We also have Proximo. If you need a boost with your business development, with your budgeting process, any of that, I've built some digital tools to help you with that. Click on the link in the show notes to take you to those. What I love about Jeremy's story is that it's not all about luxury polish. It's about grit. It's about learning how to scale big ideas down to the human level and then build them out from there. In this conversation, we dig into how he decides which elements of a concept are worth the investment. You'll hear about the raw bar. You'll hear about the open kitchen. You'll hear about the open fire cooking. We talk about the challenges of building a place that has multiple revenue streams and yet does not try too hard to be all things to all people. So Fonville Press has coffee, grab and go, retail, bar, indoor, outdoor bar, all under one roof. We talk about operational systems, cultural foundations that can make or break a new restaurant, what it's like to hire people in a resort setting where the talent pool is not only shallow, but it's not very broad either. And we also talk about the lessons that first-time owners can take away to avoid wasting time and money in their own openings. Jeremy's insights are practical, hard-earned, genuine, and deeply connected to the art of connecting with guests and promoting internal hospitality. Enjoy this episode of the Restaurant Incubator. Stay humble, stay hungry. Welcome back to the Restaurant Incubator. Today we've got Jeremy Walton with us. So Jeremy, give us an introduction and tell us who you are, where you work.
Oh man, thanks, Brandon. My name's Jeremy Walton. I have been in this industry for a long time. Been very fortunate to be in luxury hospitality side of it for a long time. Brandon and I worked alongside each other at one point with Auberge, which was great. And then after 25 plus years, ended up deciding I was going to start a company at almost 50, and we started a hospitality company. And we're super excited. For someone who's super risk averse, to actually start a business was a big jump, and pros outweighed the cons. And the only thing that didn't make the list was zombie apocalypse and global pandemic. One of those happened, so we had to do some interesting navigation to make it through that. But 5 years later, we have 3 restaurants that we just opened our third one about 2 weeks ago, called Scout, and we started with Citizen and Fonville Press. They're all very different concepts, which is kind of fun and challenging at the same time. And we've been very well received by the local community, which is all you can ever ask for. We learn every day, but we've done really well so far, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life. To be able to continue to do this, but do this for myself and with my wife has been awesome.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned that we met when we both worked for Auberge Resorts. I believe you also worked for Montage. So from that luxury hospitality background, from those 5-star experiences, what were some key touch points that you took from those days and said, these are absolutely essential. We have to have this portion of that guest experience in my restaurants?
I mean, I think that's such a great foundation. I love that part of my journey so much and miss it on so many levels because, there's this expectation, right? That it's kind of like playing in the majors, right? Where you have the most affluent customer, you have the most well-traveled customer, you have the highest expectations walking in the door. you have these very detailed and defined standards, whether that's Forbes or Michelin. You work 364 days a year to be perfect on the 365th, and it's a different mindset. It's a different culture, and people approach that differently. But I brought so much of that forward into what we were doing, and not that we were striving for accolades or stars of any kind. It was just about how do you consistently be that, try to be that good every day. And it's what I had done for so long. I knew when I opened a restaurant, I wanted to set the bar based off of that. It was like, why change the sequence of service? Why change the standards? Why not afford the same customs and courtesies no matter what we're doing? Do it with the same level of detail, the same thoughtfulness, and a lot of people don't come from that background. So it's introducing people to working that way and working at that level and teaching, and it's become a part of, I think what's helped define us or differentiate us is the fact that we don't really care whether it's, Chateaubriand tableside, or which we don't do, but or if it's, if it's a cheeseburger, right? Like why not afford it the same respect and custom and courtesies and delivering it to your guest? And so whether it's presentation, whether it's plateware, whether it's glassware, we're there's so much of those details that I loved, and being a part of putting that much thought into something so sublime or simple,
Hmm.
and paying that forward, and creative people, or industry people walk into our restaurants and they can pick out the things they know and love about it. The not so creative people just leave with a feeling of something that they love, right? And I think I think that attention to detail, we try to teach that as part of our culture, as part of our standard, and deliver that to the guest. And I think people have, certainly appreciated it because there's more thoughtfulness, and even our dog bowls are logoed, right? I don't know what to say. Like I have a bad, unhealthy obsession, I think, with some of it, but it's a thousand little things that whether you notice each of them or the sum of the parts deliver this moment or this feeling that people, they want to come back for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask a question about awards and also just press and recognition in general, since you touched on that. There are only a few places in the country that do. There are more all the time, but there are only a few that do Michelin.
Yeah.
Forbes is everywhere. But we had we had one general manager at Solage who used to say, chase the standards and celebrate the rewards. And that was his message. That was his way of saying, do it
Yeah.
right every day and the awards will come.
Right.
It can get frustrating for a crew to be working really hard and never get that article in
Right.
a national magazine, or never get that award that they feel like they should be getting. Do you have a message to your crew when it comes to that sort of outside recognition?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a great point, right? I've seen this go wrong in so many
Hmm.
places, and I've seen people heartbroken, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I think it comes down to the fundamentals of, don't get me wrong, I would love to celebrate any of those with any team I've ever worked with. I've been able to be a part of it with some, and other places we work really hard, and we've laid the foundation, and the people who walked in behind us, they got handed the trophy. But we
Hmm.
and so at the end of the day, we talk a lot about doing work that we're proud of. Like I don't benchmark against the local market as much as I do. If you were to walk in my restaurant, would you walk out going, wow, man, he nailed it? Like I sort of hang my hat on doing great work every day that I can be proud of, and this I can't take credit for this, but how do you be 1% better every day, right? That
Hmm.
mantra of just doing it right for the sake of doing it right because we care. It's because it's who we are. It's our character. It's our nature, and it, our whole company mission statement is really not so much driven around food and beverage and drink and even maybe hospitality. It's much more fundamental for us. It's about building genuine relationships and creating memorable experiences. I'm like, the vehicle is delivering great product and service and food and drink and cocktail and wine. And those are fun because it's something I'm passionate about. I have the same energy level today at 54 that I did when I started this industry. And I feel very fortunate to do something that I love. And so, yeah, I want to do it at a very high level. I want to know that, if any of my peers or any of my mentors or any of the people that I admire and respect walked in this restaurant, they would be proud of, the experience they had. And that's more important to me than what hangs on the door. Because
Mhm.
it hangs on the door. It's great. It's a monument to, the work that you've done. But you're not promised it. It's, we're in a market where, I'll be shocked if Michelin ever figures out where we are, like
Yeah.
we're in the forgotten coast of the panhandle of Florida, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's not an eater division here, like,
Uh-huh.
our notion is really centered around relationships with the people who come in the door and the experience and people coming back. And, I'd love to think one day somebody will recognize us for that. But at this point, I'm still having fun. Our team's hopefully having fun, and we really kind of preach that around this notion of, hey, we're different, right? And different in the fact that we're involved as owners. We're operators. We're not, absentee owners. Culture is our most important thing, and that culture is built a lot around standards. So,
Mhm.
we try to drive that message of just let's just be the best we can be, and I do believe people will notice whether it's people who can hang a star on the door or not. I'm not really. Be great. I'd love to celebrate that for the team's benefit, but at this point in my life, I don't need it. I
Yeah.
had those moments and they were wonderful, but this is more rewarding to just be working with a group of people and creating and hopefully innovating and doing fun stuff at a high level. It's just more fun.
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, the citizen has quickly become a community anchor. Do you mind walking us through some of the early stages of development, from identifying the need in the community to, building out the concept
Sure.
both concretely and, in your mind?
Yeah, I think what was great is, I got recruited from Montage to come to work for Alice Beach, and I was the VP of resort operations for 5 years, and so it gave me a great opportunity to really understand, understand the community, understand the market, understand the entire restaurant scene. Like it was a very necessary, quite honestly, because every market's different. There's an ebb and flow, in having, been able to be a part of it in that role was super helpful. And, it was interesting. They had really challenged me because of my background in hospitality and my relationships to go out and court restaurateurs and chefs to come open restaurants. Because obviously Alice Beach is a very affluent, um, new urbanism sort of master plan luxury community.
Mhm.
It's the demographics are really incredibly strong. They have very well traveled, high expectations, and so they wanted to sort of curate a few restaurants that would, fit that, fit the community, fit the standard. And so after spending a lot of time calling a lot of people that I knew and trying to entice them to come down here, they all turned me down. And it was actually, I thanked a lot of them for that. In hindsight, I've gone back and thanked a lot of them for turning me down because it literally was the trigger for me to do it.
Yeah.
And my wife really gets credit for that. She looked at me and it was like one day just turned to me and in a very sort of straightforward manner that she typically does, is like, why wouldn't we do it? And I'm like, wait, we have 4 kids and like I have a job and a career. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's like crazy talk. And so we mapped it out. But when we were developing the concept, it was, I mean, obviously I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Everybody in this business gets into it, I think, at some level has this aspiration of doing it.
Yeah.
And we tried a lot of times. There were points in time along the way where we tried to do this, and thankfully they didn't work out because probably now is I'm probably better positioned. I'm more mature, I'm more experienced, I more thoughtful in a lot of things, and careful with a lot of things and strategic with a lot of things. And so it was a better time. And what was interesting to me is we really started to study what wasn't here, what was missing. And when you look at the major markets that people come from, they come from great food cities, right? There's Houston and Dallas and New Orleans and Charleston, Birmingham, Nashville. I mean, so you had people that had incredibly great dining options, right? Great operators, great chefs, great experiences, iconic restaurants, right? And they were traveling here because it's such a wonderful destination from a beach standpoint, but their options were a little bit more limited, but they were paying more money because it's an
Hmm.
expensive market to operate in. So,
Hmm.
we felt like, okay, we're not going to be able to get away from the cost of doing business, but how do we deliver the value through quality? And so we felt like the thing that was the most obvious is that there was not a lot of, we sort of dubbed them city restaurants, right? When I think about my travels to, whether that's San Francisco or San Diego or Chicago or New York, like there's these just great places. I mean, and even closer to home, and Birmingham and Charleston, even and New Orleans, there's these wonderful restaurants that it was kind of shocking. There was nothing. There were a lot of those things that were missing here, and so
Hmm.
Citizen really was developed around three kind of things, right? The raw bar, which we were shocked that nobody had like an oyster program. Like there,
Yeah.
you could pick up a tennis ball and hit 10 great beach bars, right? But there was not like a really elevated or elegant kind of city bar or hotel bar, right? Which I love. I love a big, beautiful bar. And so we kind of jokingly said we're not in the restaurant business. We're in the bar that serves food business because we built every one of our restaurants around a really large bar, which
Yeah.
which is just more about the energy it brings than maybe the consumption of spirits. But we just were shocked that there were all the really nice restaurants had really small bars, right? And
Huh.
and so we're like, what if we built a really big, beautiful, elegant bar? And then we sort of developed this idea of the oyster, the raw bar. And we went through a bunch of different design iterations. At one point, I had it, attached to the actual bar, like you see in a lot of restaurants. It was kind of at the end of it, and then, that's always a conflict of ebb and flow, right? And
Hmm.
workspace and ergonomics. And so we broke it out and moved it, and then nobody was really doing live fire cooking. Like, so we were like, what if we did a wood burning hearth? And we then it kind of came back to, how do you anchor this to something authentic and relevant in terms of, the food philosophy? And so the idea of, coastal tavern was just kind of when we distilled all these different words and descriptions and ideas down, it was kind of like, okay, this is tavern to me, harkens back to like Park Tavern or Gramercy Tavern, right?
Yeah.
Two of my favorite experiences.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, we want to build a big, beautiful bar, right? And then we want to have a great food program. And then we felt like there was this huge opportunity to really explore. There are a lot of these regional oyster farmers just down in like Apalachicola and Panacea, and there were all these young people and that were starting to farm these great oysters, and they were very consistent and they were delicious, and they were not the typical oyster that most people consume, and nobody was really doing that program. And so
Hmm.
we built this big, beautiful 13 seat, raw bar that centers on an open kitchen that frames this wood burning hearth, right? It's the first
Cool.
three things you see when you walk in the door. And then everything else just sort of came about look and feel and identity and branding and what do we want the vibe to be and how do we want people to feel when they walk through the door and we certainly battling this balance between not people perceiving it was fine dining, which is nothing against it. It's just not what we were trying to
Hmm.
create a great neighborhood everyday restaurant and that was elevated and refined and very focused in what it was doing, but it was very approachable at the
Yeah.
same time. And I think the greatest compliment we still get in terms of designing that restaurant is that when people come in and like I meet people, it just, I mean, I literally almost want to tear up when they're like, we've been here 4 times this week. And I'm like, what? I met one old couple that came into lunch. They were there for a week and they came into lunch every day. And I almost tried to encourage them to go somewhere else. I was like, are you sure? Can I help you make a reservation? Would you like to try another restaurant? Like our lunch menu's not that big. Like,
Yeah.
like I feel bad that you keep coming back here, but they're like, no, why would we go anywhere else? We'd love it. I mean, those are the things where you feel like, all right, well, we've somewhere along the way made a connection, through the product or the people or both, you hope. And And that was kind of the genesis of Citizen. And I think, in a lot of ways, I mean, we're still learning. It's a very young restaurant at 5 years. We're still figuring things out and trying to, it's just young. It's like having a bunch of toddlers. Like I feel like I'm raising kids again because Fondle's 3, Citizen's 5, and Scout's like
Counts.
2
Newborn.
months, a
Yeah.
month. Yeah, newborn. So, it's great when, people get it. You hope people get it. I mean, I got the idea. I love the idea, but it doesn't mean that they're going to love the execution or love it the way we do. But people have responded really well. I think it would hit them. It hit hit a need, right? That was
Uh-huh.
missed. So
Uh-huh.
we got lucky with that.
Well, I love how you talk about the first three things, the design elements that are also functional elements, the bar, the raw bar, the live fire, and open kitchen. And I wanted to ask about ergonomics because you touched on that too. So when I struggle with completely blank slates. I like for a few walls or whatever to be in place.
Yeah.
And just being a grumpy old line cook at heart, I tend to design restaurants with the kitchens a little bigger than they need to be and an adequate amount of storage because no place that's ever built
Amen.
ever has enough storage. So
Amen.
when,
Yeah.
once
Yeah.
you had those three design elements in place, how did you just give our listeners a little insight? Because I think ergonomics of how the servers are going to get in and out of the dish room, or the cooks are going to get in and out of the walk-in, or where deliveries come, or where guests are going to stand when they have to wait, often get lost and are detrimental to both the worker experience and the guest experience. So how do you approach the ergonomics of
Well,
design?
I can't even emphasize this enough. I think it's a often, it's funny. My throughout my career, what sort of happened by happens, just sort of accidentally happened in working in resorts when I was in particular with Sea Island. There was this very difficult architect that was doing all these design projects, and for some reason he and I had a great relationship, and I was like the only person that he would let stand next to him and actually open his mouth and offer an opinion. And like I'm like so used to inheriting bad, poorly designed spaces. And so, and you get very creative and you adapt and you create, workarounds, but it's
Mhm.
so much easier when it's lines on paper and
Yeah,
it's almost less expensive to spend the extra time doing it, right? And a lot of
totally,
people I
totally.
don't think dedicate enough time and energy to the minutia of these very fundamental functions because they don't understand how they all come together to either create efficiency or inefficiency, right?
Yeah.
And so working on, I sort of fell into this working on the design side, and that continued even with Auberge and Montage, and even at Alice, we did a lot of ground up constructions. And so for me, it's having that experience of turning the lights on and off, thinking more granularly about what workflow looks like for every single position in the restaurant is incredibly invaluable. And two things happened. One, it was always built into the design of Citizen. It was always a focus in Citizen. The delays of COVID gave me even more time alone in my brain to obsess over it, right? Where
Hmm.
where literally taping off the shelves for the back bar on a blank wall that I had to repaint because when I pulled the tape off. Anyway, like
Yeah. I
you
know the story.
everybody did some obsessive compulsive things during COVID, I think. But the distance between the front bar and the back bar, right? I think
Yeah.
you mentioned to it. Like I worked in a kitchen one time when I was an apprentice, and it was like one extra step from the front line to the back line. I couldn't just turn and pivot and grab what I needed. It was too far. It was like two steps,
Hmm.
should have been one, and it killed. It added. It was painful, and so we obsessed over those details at Citizen. I mean, I moved the service station from the ends to the center. We do wine by the glass for the servers because it doesn't slow down the velocity of the bar because we have a
Hmm.
complicated bar program. So we manage our wine costs differently, but I also like the fact that if the wine by the glass is accessible on the floor, if I'm working the floor, I can ask a server, what is table 20? They're drinking Sancerre. Well, I can grab that bottle of Sancerre on my way to the table, and it gives me a purposeful reason to be at the table, right? We
Hmm.
train our managers to don't go to the table unless you're part of the sequence of service, unless you know it,
Right.
right? Like it needs to be organic. And so but all those things were designed into the space. Like we kept the ceilings high in the kitchen. We left windows, which was is loosely inspired by the renovation at the laundry, right? Where you have these
Hmm.
beautiful windows looking in. We're like, look, we have an open kitchen. We want to celebrate our culinary team, right? But what's it like? I mean, we've all worked in those like submarine kitchens where the ceilings are like barely 7 feet, and we just wanted to create, we have prep space separate from workspace. We cut a door in where our bar has its own wait station, and we call it the beverage lab, but it's where they do their batching and their prep and their all their garnishes. But we have a door where they can get their deliveries, right? So they have their own walk-in separate from the kitchen. I mean, don't get me wrong, these things cost money, right? But if you can afford to build in the efficiency on the front end, right? Not every project allows for that, but if you can,
Mhm.
they pay dividends in the long term, right? We have an incredible food cost. We have great velocity in our kitchen, in our bar, and we're doing some not terribly complex things, but we're doing some, very, very thoughtful, somewhat complex things. We're trying to deliver quality and speed, right? Which is always somewhat in
Yeah.
conflict with each other. We spent a lot of money on China, but which was a decision because we're like, we can't have nine touches. We
Mhm.
do Citizens 140 seat restaurant. And kind of the marvel of it to me, still to this day, is that 40 of those are outside, 13 are at the raw bar, 18 are at the bar. So the dining room is really about a 70 seat dining room. It's like a small hotel dining room in some ways, but we do 400 covers on a Friday night, so that's a lot of volume. And to
Yeah.
do quality, those are at odds often. We have things we could do, we would like to do, but it limits it. But we
Yeah.
found this balance. And if we would not have put that much thought into the ergonomics of both the server workflow for servers, the dish pit, the prep, the kitchen, and also quality of coming to work, right? We wanted people to want to come to work there because we talk a lot about how we tried to think about what the experience was like for the team. We almost built the space around, actually we did. We really built the space around the workflow, the team that was going to be working there, knowing that we could make it beautiful for the guests. But if we can make it easier to achieve these standards, it's more likely that we'll have consistency. And that was absolutely one of the driving philosophies behind everything we've done. But certainly Citizen being the first one probably was more terrified to get that wrong than not. And we had extra time to start to really drill down on it.
Well, you touched on a manager's visit to the table and how it needs to be part of the sequence of service. It needs to be organic, and this is something that I hear our director of operations talk about quite a lot. And he has he teaches our managers to go with water service or run dessert because we've all been part of that cringe-inducing interaction with the manager who just comes over and says, "So how was everything?" And it's just
Right.
and nobody nobody likes that. Nobody enjoys it. It doesn't seem authentic, and there's no and it
Yeah.
is almost it detracts from the experience. So
Yeah.
knowing that all managers have different strengths and not all are
Yeah.
amazing table side, what are some other coaching points that you give those managers to add to the guest experience when they approach the table?
I mean, there are so many people that are better working the floor than I am, but I love it, and I only know one way to do it, right? Like
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time teaching this because I do think one of my early mentors was an older Greek gentleman, and he had this storied career in hospitality before anybody cared who the chef was or you could ever
Yeah.
see into a kitchen, right? It was the maitre d' of like, the Copacabana Club and Waldorf
Yeah.
Astoria in New York, right? These were like his resume read like a who's who of like 50s hospitality. But his whole thing was, the restaurant's going to take on the personality of the person running it, right? Like you're going to you are the gravity and the energy in the room as a leader, right? In particular, it's true in the back of the house as well, right? But in the front of the house, right? I think we've lost something, and it's great because I've heard a couple people have this conversation, which I think is really encouraging because that idea. Like I know a couple of these people. Like Mickey Bass from Charleston is a great example of like the iconic maitre d' personality. And I think there's only a handful of those left. I don't even consider myself one of those. I try to emulate those behaviors as much as possible, and I try to learn from it. But to your point, right? you know, it's almost easy, right? I'm trying to be everywhere at the same time. That's all I know,
Hmm.
right? Like if I get hung up talking to a table that I know that it's like the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and as soon as I can
Yeah.
release from that engagement, there's like seven other places I have to go touch, right? And I'm going to touch
Hmm.
this as fast as possible. But along the way, you see so much, you hear so much, right? Like I'm at the table when I run food with the team, or I hear the delivery, I see how they lay it down. I get the facial expressions of the guests. I see if the glasses are full or empty, right? it almost sort of slows everything down when you do this, because it's like you can see, if you're really paying attention, you can see all these things that tell you a lot of incredible, valuable information. So we tell of our managers, like I won't share where, but I had an experience recently where I took my kids to a restaurant in DC, a very good restaurant, and I watched two managers stand in one place for 2.5 hours. The servers did remarkable. The food was remarkable. It was a great experience, but I couldn't unfixate on the fact that these people
Yeah.
didn't move through. I mean, I was literally coming out of my skin. My kids are like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Nothing." And I'm like, "Everything's great."
Relax,
And they're
Daddy.
like, "No, it's not, Dad. What are you do? What are you are literally not here." I go, "I'm here. That's the problem." But they didn't move. It just
Yeah.
it perplexed me. And
Mhm.
but when you're on the floor in that role, right? I tell everybody, I was like, your team should describe you as helpful, right?
Mhm.
You're leading them, but you can do a much better job of that. I mean, it's the what I love about this industry is like sports analogies are a dime a dozen, but it's you get to play in the game and coach it, right? It's
Yeah.
player coach all day long if you're doing it right, in my mind. And so, the example of, like, I walk through the dining room with a serviette in my hand and a water bottle, right? Because
Mhm.
I'm going to find somebody that I can top the
Yeah.
water off, right? Or I'm going
Yeah.
to go clear, right? But if I'm there, I'm seeing every guest expression. I'm seeing every tabletop. I'm seeing all the food come out. I am absolutely organically part of that sequence of service. And that is what we try to teach that to all of our front of house leaders. It's like standing at the host stand. A lot of times we'll have two managers on the floor, and the door is incredibly important. It controls the entire tempo of the restaurant. So there may need to be a manager up there, but there's got to be somebody on the floor, right? There's got to be somebody making those evolutions through the restaurant, being everywhere at once, touching tables, and not touching them the way, I almost hate that word, but it's serving the tables, right? It's not really touching them. You're serving them, and you're engaging, and it creates those more organic moments to you know to talk to the ladies and gentlemen that are in the restaurant and get feedback. And it's not
Mhm.
this sort of cold transactional thing that happens in a lot of other places, sadly. So it's absolutely built into the DNA of what we talk about, that there's expectations of leadership, right? I was going back to sports analogies quickly, but talking about this notion of, I played basketball my whole time, high school, college, growing up. And I use this analogy, unfortunately, because it's such a good one. Is like, I never had a coach that was in the office during the game. Like that's not a thing.
That's
There's
great.
really can't be in the office during the game. And we talk about this with the leadership in the room and the associates. We do reorientation every year, and we kind of put this message out there front and center. But the reality is that I never had a coach that didn't give me positive and constructive feedback. Some of it didn't feel constructive at the time, but it was all throughout the game from the sidelines, right? And talking about, from our perspective, we get to be on the floor. And I never played for a coach we didn't practice, which I go back to, that's training in our world,
Mhm.
right? So training is incredibly important, right? And feedback is, engagement's important. And I tell people, like, hey, if you've come to work for us and you're not used to or comfortable receiving feedback on how you can be better, right? Then we may not be the right place for you to work. Like, and I do this with the leaders in the room, and I'm like, and if you're not getting that from these ladies and gentlemen sitting over here, they're not doing their job, because there has to be this ongoing dialogue about how do we get better, and we have to be very open and honest. And a lot of people, I've run into a lot of leadership now, they're a little conflict averse, and
Mhm.
there's a really safe way to do this in the standpoint of, if it's all standards driven, right? If we're, living behind the fact, or living with the fact that these standards are what make us and define us, and define who we are to anybody who walks through the door, whether that's an employee, whether that's a vendor, whether that's a guest, right? That's a safe space to lead from, right? Like, because you're not, it's not personal, it's not emotional, it's 100% driven by a commitment to a purpose, or a standard, or an experience. And we just try to build off of that and give people this confidence to have these conversations, because if we're not having them, we're never going to get to be what we could. We're never going to reach our potential. We're never going to be what we should be, and we're certainly never going to be consistent. So, which is kind of the enemy of any great restaurant, right? So
Mhm.
it's every day is kind of that message we're trying to drive home and fuel the team with, right?
Well, I imagine that this, close personal and authentic guest engagement leads to, mostly great guest feedback, mostly guest reviews. If you and I think back to those years in luxury hospitality, there is so much guest feedback. It is so detailed and it is so crucial to, all sorts of operational decisions that get made throughout the resort. Now, private restaurants don't have those resources to gather that data, one, or kind of the amplitude to provide these amenities or these special experiences or these
Sure.
special welcome packages or whatever. So one, how do you filter data in terms of what do you think are the most important platforms that you use, and then how
Sure.
do you put that into action with the team?
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, I mean, you think about when we started out, right? And where we are today with technology, access to
Hmm.
information is like overload, right? It's almost
Hmm.
the counter, right? Now you have to filter it and figure out how to
Right.
take the parts of it that matter and put them to work. But the fact that you have access to this stuff that we used to have to mine for, like we'd have to
Yeah.
calculate it. I mean, doing Excel spreadsheets and doing all this manual calculation to just sort of figure out the financial side, or, surveys, and, in the old days of, comment cards and sifting through,
Yeah.
manual data, I mean, and then look, there's value in that to this day. I don't even know that that's completely dead, but we, with the platforms that we use, I mean, Resi, right? I mean, not an endorsement, but they have great analytics. I mean, they've got great backing with Amex. They've developed that technology, and there's a lot of other people out there that do it. It just, we use those analytics. I mean, it gives you, a survey that goes out. We get, even it doesn't even matter the response rate. We get a good response rate. It's not the majority of the people that come in the dining, because not
Mhm.
everybody takes their time. But if it's
Yeah.
an aggregate of the total, right? If it's a sample, right? A test case of out of this many people, this is how they feel. It's great data, but it gives you, by menu selection, by cuisine taste and quality, by day of the week, by meal period. So,
Mhm.
and then just reading the comments, right? Read the words that people are using. And we have a big thing. I mean, engagement's important, right? You're never going to get it right all the time. Our industry is the most difficult thing to be in. It's the only business that I know of you're trying to perfect an experience for all five senses. That's so subjective, especially when we talk about taste, right? The dish could be executed perfectly. For 25 years, I've ordered the last thing in any restaurant I've owned or managed, the last thing that someone complained about. I've ordered it every
Mhm.
time because I know I tasted it when we rolled it out.
Mhm.
So did we not execute it correctly, or is it just they don't like it? And that's okay. We're never going to ever be 100% when it comes to taste, but you got to care enough to double back and find out which one it was. And talking to people, like we have our GMs, and we read a survey. There's people who give, I feel like you've seen this, right? There are people who give feedback and it almost feels like they're giving the feedback because they like giving the feedback.
Uh-huh.
It's not necessarily, doesn't feel really constructive, and they're at least
I'm
the
I'm
choice of their
familiar with
words.
that.
Yeah. And my PR company thankfully does not let me respond to those. I write them and then they tear them up and say, absolutely, you will not send that. Um, and I'm actually mature enough in my older age to listen to them, which was different from probably before.
Mhm.
But you have to, the words matter, right? You have to read them. The people that are trying to tell you something constructive, it's great to get on the phone with them, because as
Yeah.
you know, that the one tool you do have that is kind of universal, if you think back to, resort hospitality, you're always doing follow up, right? And the lemons into lemonade analogy of, like, some of the greatest relationships I have with guests have been because of something we messed up, right?
Yeah.
And the recovery can matter more than the mishap, right? And you can
Mhm.
build something really special out of it. And if you're really smart, that's the goal, right? Because you're going to make a mistake. And so how do you want to own that and recover from it? And so a lot of times picking up the phone, and those people who genuinely, care about giving feedback and aren't just giving it to maybe be malicious, right? Um, it matters, and they appreciate it. Like, a lot of those phone calls are like, "Hey, look, these are things I need to know. You're never going to hurt my feelings, whether that's true or
Mhm.
not." We tell everybody, "You're not going to hurt my feelings,"
Yeah.
but we need to know, and we need to evaluate. And you never make decisions off of one piece of information. You've got to look at, you got to really go through the data and understand it and look at the masses. It's just gotten so much easier with the tools that are available to you now, right? the POS systems come with a lot of analytics. I mean, we use some very specific analytics for server performance where it does a wonderful job of drilling down on what the median PPA or per person average is for a server, and then
Hmm.
shows you the people who are below it and the people who are above it. And then it goes out and extrapolates that data to show you what the sales would have been if everybody below median would have performed at median.
Hmm.
And then it goes and shows what they would have earned in gratuity had they actually performed at that level. Well, that has meaning to everybody in the room, right?
Yeah.
It matters to the business, it matters to the team, in particular, obviously your service team, right? And we every other month do these performance report cards with them. That software costs me $1,200 a year.
Hmm.
That's I won't tell you who it is because I don't want to raise the price, but it's like
Yeah.
incrementally, right? That's a great value, but it gives us information to use in a very specific, meaningful way. And so we try to pick the things that matter and focus on those and leverage that. But it's so much easier. I mean, it's not easy, but it's easier because you have access to the stuff that didn't exist. It's on your
Yeah.
phone, which is remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. That's incredible. I agree. Well, I want to change tacks a little bit, and have you give us a thumbnail sketch of the Fonville Press, and tell us about like the different concepts that are built within there, the different
Yeah.
revenue streams, and how you try to, how you achieve balance with those, and what sort of what that calculus of having one place but different types of revenue coming in looks like.
So yeah, I read this question and I laughed because I was like, oh man, he's going to call me out on this. Yeah, because you're smart enough to read between the lines. The reality of Fomble, right? There's a lot of layers to that concept. Certainly, it's something that existed previously, right? And so, how do you reimagine that and not lose the connection that people have with the
Hmm.
original, knowing it's never going to be the original? So
Right.
that was a delicate balance. Um, in most business schools, they tell you to never try to please all people all the
Hmm.
time, or and and I knew that I had read that and I agree with that statement, but somehow along the way, I just decided to sort of just drive the bus off the cliff and go, hey, what if we built a Swiss Army knife of a restaurant, right?
Uh-huh.
Literally, I don't even own a Swiss Army knife because but I built one in terms of a restaurant concept against all the sort of prevailing logical business thought, right? Is like
Uh-huh.
the notion, and when I think about it in hindsight, I'm like, dude, what were you thinking, right? Because it's like, even just describing it is fun. Is like, what is it? Well, it's a coffee shop, it's a bar, it's a bakery, it's a cafe, it's a
Uh-huh.
market, right? Okay, nobody can do all of those things inside of one space very well. Um, but somehow we thought, yeah, we could do it. Certainly, we could take that challenge on. And I will tell you, we had, we put an incredible amount of thought into the ergonomics of that to try to make that work. I got a lot of comments on it's overbuilt, it costs too much, and now we're adding an outdoor walk-in and adding a second espresso machine, right? So the short story of Fonville is that it was ambitious, right? And we
Hmm.
know that going in, and I was probably more scared of that concept than anything else. But a lot of my partners were super excited about it. They thought it was going to be great, and I literally was almost telling them, I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. Like this is
Hmm.
markets are tricky, right?"
Yeah.
And so, the irony of it is I was wrong, right? Like
Hmm.
not about the fact that we were ambitious. We struggled with some of the execution early on because we had a very, we really kind of said, what does a great market look like? What does that product look like? What does that menu look like? And we got really big in the menu and and under normal volumes, it would have been probably manageable, right? But under the volumes that we do, which is incredible. That restaurant, is 140 seats, but 100 of those are outside. You have
Hmm.
30% of the space is allocated to the market. You have a bar with it's indoor outdoor bar with the windows opened up. And you have 8 seats on the bar outside and about 13 in. So again, and it's in the center of the restaurant and it's counter service, right? It's full service at the bar, counter service at the thing. We have display cases. We're making our own bagels. We're humidity is tough down here, so we don't do
Yeah.
we buy croissant dough and we make our own
Hmm.
pastries and croissants with that. But so we, and we were doing bread in the beginning, which we had just until I can sort of identify two overnight bakers, we kind of had to back down on the retail bread program. But we're doing
Hmm.
we're doing all the bagels and all the pastries, and it's a great program and it's exciting. But that restaurant does, on a $29 average check, will easily do $30,000 in a day.
Wow.
That's 2,000 people, right?
Yeah.
So here's the crazy thing. Like I can't even explain it, right? Like I'm humbled in so many ways. One, that we were able to somehow manage the volume as well as we do. We've so much more potential and things we're trying to learn. I mean, it's 3 years old and we've learned a lot, very quickly with the volume, but the volume dynamics became the real challenge, right? It wasn't the
Hmm.
diversity in what we were doing. We adjusted and modified and refined the things we were doing, but to manage the volume and to do them very well. And but what's been maybe the most humbling is the response, right? Like
Hmm.
people, we did someone who's kind of a social media consultant was talking about, hey, most people on social media, go to a coffee shop, they take a picture of the coffee, right? At Fonville, people take a picture of themselves because they want people to know that they were there, right? There's a different relationship. And I didn't quite, this was kind of new to me. I didn't really think about it in those terms, but when you have, 800, 900 checks a day, which represent probably at least 2.5 or 2.2 people because it's counter
Hmm.
service, it's a lot of people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're just I mean, it's crazy, and I'm probably more perplexed than anybody by it. I mean, to be honest, but we have a line out the door on busy weekends and Labor Day. They had done $11,000 by 11 a.m. and they open at 7. That's coffee and biscuits, right? Like and breakfast flatbreads and pastry and bagels and it is, people like it. I love that. I like it. I
Yeah.
thought it was an interesting concept coming out of COVID and how do you create something that's just very user friendly from the customer, right? A lot of
Hmm.
options, simple to get, fast, convenient, comfortable, design forward, which is kind of built into everything we do. It has some, it has great branding, it has great character, it had a great legacy in many ways.
Hmm.
The original Fonville was built in 2005, like one of the first things built at Alice Beach in the beginning, and it became sort of the front door for that community, and it existed for till 2018. I mean, so not just for the Alice community, but for the entire, kind of local 30A and Walton County community, this thing had kind of become a fixture. And when it went away because they wanted to move in a different direction and lease that space out, and I was there. I was working for them. I actually had to shut this thing down. There were like 1,500 negative, Facebook posts, right? So it had some value and relationship with the local community because there was a lot of backlash when it went away. And so we were like, wow, okay, can we, leverage that to bring some part of that back in a way that people would appreciate, but it's a very different concept. I mean, that was a very small coffee shop with a very small kitchen.
Hmm.
It was built next to a park and we have like an outdoor plaza and, it's a much bigger space and footprint, but it really did sort of, our mantra of trying to take that on and reimagine it as a community center was kind of a big thing. Is like we wanted it to be this kind of gathering spot or this third space where you had a lot of different reasons to draw you in. So it wasn't about like, hey, we can do all these incredibly disciplined things like baking and bar and a great cafe and a great market really well. It was more about how do we create something that has value to in a lot of different ways. And we're
Hmm.
still figuring it out. I mean, we really are. And time is a great teacher, right? You see what sells, you listen to the feedback, the comments, but overwhelmingly the fact that people keep coming back and our business keeps increasing by 15% every year, something resonates, right? And there was a need. It was some sort of blue ocean moment perhaps. And now we're really focused on the capital improvements to manage the volume better. We're adding a second espresso machine. We're expanding the bar to have a bigger workstation for the baristas, right? it all kind of goes full circle back to what we talked about in the beginning, which is ergonomics, right? It's
Hmm.
great that you have demand, but if you can't execute it, right, you're going
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not going to sustain. And so our thing is how quickly can we learn and grow and adapt and improve to meet the demand. And that's kind of our hugest, biggest focus at Fonville right now. But it's been a
Yeah.
fun concept. Like it's got this whole Southern California kind of design. It's all pink and green with our bathrooms have become, I don't know, insta famous, I guess.
All right. People
Was
take
trying to
pictures of
explain
themselves in
that to me.
there.
Yeah, like I see more pictures of our bathroom show up, like the merchandise. People dig the merchandise. Like I'm so used to like seeing logos of restaurants on uniforms, right? That when I see someone like randomly walking down the street, my first instinct is like, oh my God, do you work? For but then we sell tons of merch. Now I'm like, oh my God, people are wearing our, it's just, I don't know, it's kind of overwhelming in some way, but it's just never
Yeah.
what I expected. But it's beyond expectations, which is great, and people seem to dig it. So,
Yeah. That's
yeah.
killer. That's killer. Well, from Napa, maybe whether it's Napa Valley or like Bluffton, South Carolina, Alice Beach, Aspen. So these are places where, as you said, the affluent, the well-traveled, and those with high expectations go to enjoy their leisure time and to spend a good amount of money. But those are some of the places that have the shallowest, smallest labor pools. So, in Alice Beach and other places that other resort destinations that you've worked in, what is your approach to not only hiring but also staff retention?
I mean, this word's used a lot, but I mean, I will beat this drum to death, but it's culture, right? It is
Hmm.
engagement and it's culture, right? If that is not the first and most important thing on your mind in the building every day, I don't know. It's not the same. Labor, post COVID, there were a lot of great people that found other avenues and other things to do and did not come back. Right.
Hmm.
We all, I don't care where you are. I don't think anybody was untouched by that in the industry. And so, grappling with that reality when it was never easy before, like, I mean,
Hmm. Yeah.
in bigger markets, you had more access to talent, but you had more
More
competition of people
competition.
trying to
Yeah.
hire it, right? It's all relevant. And so here, it's a high cost of living. Affordable housing is a huge discussion, in a lot of, areas for us down here and even with local leaders and the community and the government is you have to. It's not sustainable to grow at the pace we're growing and not create, places for people that can have a quality of life, to be down here because it is an expensive place to live and operate. And so, but we have done incredibly well. And I don't give us credit for that. I just the team members that we've been able to attract and retain and connect with, we rely on a lot of international workers, are just part of our family. And, they sacrifice maybe more than anyone else, right? They're
Hmm.
leaving home and their family and their friends and their culture, and they're coming here on work visas and working with us for a period of time and going back, and they come back and work with us when they come back. I mean, it's everybody is part of that family, and we're just lucky that we have been able to sort of build a team of people that kind of believe in what we're trying to do, and we talk so much about culture, and we try to reinforce that, and it was funny. We were when I was halfway through designing Citizen, and I had this panic moment, and I was like, "Oh my God, we're starting a company. Like, who are we? What are we? What do we believe?"
Hmm.
And we've all worked for those places, right? I mean, you can put it on the wall, you can put it in a card and hand it out, you can make people memorize it, but if it isn't something you can see, touch, and feel when you walk in the building every day, it's just words, right? And so
Hmm. Yeah.
we really were kind of cautious, like we're going to put this stuff in writing, but how do we reinforce this and live it every day? And so I wiped my entire desk off in that one moment and ended up writing down what became, this very cheesy thing called the 7 C's, because every one of our values is a word that starts with C, and seven just seemed to be a great pun, if nothing else. But it's this notion of, and they're all familiar things. They're not they're not unique words, but it's caring, it's character, it's community, it's communication, it's collaboration, which is one of my favorite ones. Um, you know, uh, we really try to define those, and what does that mean for everybody that comes to work for us, and what is expected of you based on this, and we do reorientation every year, and we really try to use those as our guidelines for making decisions, right? We
Hmm.
try to stay very true to that. And I think, both with our leadership team and Angela and I, who works with me, on the operations side, she's really the champion of that. We hear it a lot of times. There's like a lot of owners, they don't get to know the people that work in the restaurants. They're kind of, a little bit, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just they're removed from it. And we're just not.
Hmm.
We make it a point to get to know everybody that comes to work for us because we think it would be a disservice to not, and so
Yeah.
we're very engaged and we build those relationships. And, it gets harder and harder as we grow, but we're still doing it because
Hmm.
I don't know that there's a way forward without it. And so, we talked about, it's not a Four Seasons down the street that I can hire from, right? I'm not going to be
Yep.
able to bring people from somewhere that had this skill set that you and I, were fortunate enough to spend enough time to develop, ourselves. I don't have that to pull from. So we're introducing people to an idea of, what service looks like and what hospitality and what culinary looks like and what, spirits and wine look like and how do we do these things, teach these things. We often get very experienced, bartenders, right? But they are not used to juicing fresh and creating
Hmm.
balance in the cocktails and
Right.
understanding the ingredients the same way, so and a lot of people are excited by that learning, which is the people you want, right? We understand you've maybe not been exposed to it, but if you're interested in it, we can teach you. And that's become sort of the backbone of everything we've done. And I got to be honest, we've not had a difficult time. I should knock on wood and should
I'll
not
do it
say
for
this
you.
out loud. Yeah, I should probably not say this out loud, but and I don't know that I can pinpoint why, but I really want to believe it's because the people that do work with us, the word of mouth, the engagement, the culture, I really feel like those are the things that have resonated with our team, and that people have,
Hmm.
come back and brought other people to work with us. That's been the cornerstone of maybe our success in that respect, because it is a difficult market here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to wrap things up, but I want to ask about Scout. So Scout is 2 months old, and I would like to hear about your impetus for bringing it to life, but to do so through the lens of, a question I always encourage operators or chefs who want to become owners to ask themselves is, what problem is this business going to solve? And so when you thought about Scout and you brought that to life, would you tell us about it and what problem it solves for your community?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple people. I don't know if you remember when Thomas came and spoke to us at Solage, right?
Yeah, I
He
do.
talked about, that there's not a lot of real innovation. There's just really great. If you're really aware and you are looking for inspiration, you can find it. But it's not about innovating a lot of new things. It's about seeing things, identifying things, and building off of them. And I think that
Mhm.
resonated with me in a really powerful way. And I got to tell him that he actually came to have dinner at Citizen. He was
Nice.
here, and I got to reconnect with him, and I got to at least thank him for that, because it was very much the big part of the genesis of everything we've done since, with our own restaurants. But um, Scout is something that is very, it's a concept or a genre, or whatever you want to call it. Like, everyone sort of wanted to just, once they heard sports tavern, mine went straight to sports bar, right? Like, it was,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't even worth unpacking it, because they weren't gonna, unless you were an
They weren't
architect
gonna
or
hear
a designer or
it.
creative, they weren't gonna, they were all, that's all they were gonna hear, right?
Uh-huh.
But what we were really trying to do was to take something that people know and love and reimagine it in a little bit more thoughtful way.
Hmm.
And I kind of run from some of the words of like elevated and refined, but they're fitting, right? It is a more elegant version of something that people know and love. And so this space, we were talking about design earlier. I work with my kitchen designer who I've known for 25, 30 years. And we tend to lay out these kitchens and bars first and then go find the architects and the interior designers. And I drive them crazy because I have to apologize to them on the front end and go, if you're not comfortably holding the flashlight through every step of this process, we're not gonna work together very
Yeah.
well, because again, I think I'm not I can get the plane off the ground. I just can't. I need really talented, creative people who I have immense respect for what they do. I appreciate their patience with me in the design process, but I have very clear, defined idea of so many of the details that we want to infuse into these restaurants, but we build it around workflows. So Scout was lent itself to be it was the first restaurant that allowed us to kind of have the dining room adjacent to the bar. And all of our other
Hmm.
restaurants, the bars kind of anchors it. And so we were able to sort of create this idea of a classic American restaurant in the dining room. The wood paneling, the curtains, the blinds, the table lamps, the big banquettes, the open kitchen, kind of the brick tiles. We have the vintage logo plates, right? Like, it was
Yeah.
very much a throwback to, there are a lot of people doing great versions of this in Chicago and New York, and there are a lot of iconic restaurants that have been around 50 years doing this. But it was fun to sort of take something that had this sort of sports attachment to kind of old sports. And so there's like no athlete past 1985 that hangs on the walls in here, right? Like half the people, the generation that walk in here, unless they're super sports aficionados, don't even know who these people are. They just know it's very
Right.
retro and vintage, and they kind of dig it.
Probably
But
AI probably made those people up, right? That's
yeah,
what they think.
exactly. And so, yeah, they're probably fictitious, but for those of us at our age, right, it almost kind of harkens back to childhood and ABC
Yeah.
watching all the sports. And so much of the genesis of this was, inspired by a bunch of different places and travels. And, I thought the Chicago Athletic Club Hotel and the Cherry Circle Room and the game room
Mhm.
were remarkable, experiences, right? That was sort of, and it was a true historic building, and it was, reimagined and brought back to, and it's just a great experience, but it felt good, and you look at that kind of connection. And so, even in some ways, right, the graduate hotels, right, like this more thoughtful approach to celebrating, people's affinity and their connection with these
Mhm. Yeah.
colleges and universities, and doing that in a little bit more thoughtful way. There was a lot of that kind of went into, okay, people love a sports bar, but could you create a more refined one? And so we had the ability to do the kind of this classic American restaurant in the dining room. And then we were able to kind of do this mashup of, two things that I love, right? I love a great hotel lobby bar, and I love a great dive bar. Two
Hmm.
very polar opposite things, but if perhaps there was an illicit affair between the two and there was a child that was born out of that, then maybe Scout's Bar is that. I mean, we have,
Love
Evel
it.
Knievel hanging on the walls,
Yeah.
like Harlem Globetrotter pinball machine. We have, everything from fencing masks to cold beer signs over the coolers, right? And we just kind of doubled down on this sort of relationship with sports and cocktails and food. And, it is, I told the chefs, like, hey, if anyone has to pull out their phone and Google an ingredient, we have completely screwed this up, right? Like this should not be anything remotely close to complicated or
Right.
unique, right? It should just be great classic American cuisine,
Yeah.
done well. And so we felt like that there were an infinite amount of great sports bars, and I love them all, right? I do. It's something that is near and dear to my heart for sure. But we were like, what if
Yeah.
we had one that was a little more buttoned up, or a little bit, if we that had this more, old vintage country club, municipal golf course clubhouse feel, right? Like an old Muni, or this old Chicago dive bar feel. Like we were trying to sort of mash up beautiful and elegant and refined with very comfortable and approachable. And I think it hit
Hmm.
I mean, I hope, like, I mean, it's 2 months old, but the response has been good. People seem to dig the space, and in particular the vibe. We put a lot of thought into the details. There are tons of Easter eggs hidden in here, with design elements, and that's my own obsession, and, unhealthy one probably at that. Branding is equally as important because it all tells a story. Like these are the
Yeah.
things that we just never compromised on in our projects is, do you have to do matches? No. Do people love matches? Yes. Right. Like,
Yeah.
is it an expensive thing to do? Yeah, it is. It's a third column kind of thing. Can I translate
Yeah.
on the P&L how that actually generates more revenue? Probably not. Do I
Yeah.
believe it does? Yeah. And if
Yeah.
not, I'm just fooling myself, and I'll keep doing it anyway. But, um, I do think people appreciate details. Like I think
Uh-huh.
whether it's perceived or not. Like I think it somehow matters in a way that's unknown to them. And for creative people, maybe, or people that like details, it absolutely, they single these things out.
Yeah, I mean, think about the pencils in the room at Auberge du Soleil. Why do you need 20 sharp pencils in your $900 a night? You don't, but people
I'm gonna
remember the
journal
freaking
on
of all
this. I'm
things.
gonna
People remember the
journal
freaking
on this
pencils.
3x5 pad about my
Yeah.
study, or yeah, or I'm gonna fill out the postcard. No, um, yeah, but by the way, in that same room, you got about 99 other things,
Yeah.
between some of the coolest snacks and bottle of wine
Uh-huh.
and and you should for the price point. But it's like going to the ranch. I
Uh-huh.
remember the first time I went there, I was like, I don't even have to leave. I could literally survive
Yeah.
in the room with all of the complimentary amenities.
No kidding.
I may never see the restaurant, right? I might just stay
Yeah.
in this room because it was so cool.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, the merchandise, those little details, they do add up and resonate.
Uh-huh.
And and I think people, whether they realize it or not, they appreciate the thoughtfulness, right? When we were
Yeah.
talking about doing nachos and wings, which we do, like we do these wings, and uh, you know, they're French, so some people get it, some people don't, but they're very easy to eat, and
Mhm.
but we serve them with three hot steam towels, right? Like that one little thing
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
this is a food that everyone loves, but you know, what's the downside, right? Like, how do you
Yeah.
eat and the cleanup afterward?
Gotta take a shower. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so we kind of tried to put more thought into some of these very common things that everybody loves. And then, like, we do the cheese for the nachos table side, right?
Okay.
I have this
Nice.
big Dover sole plate, right? Like I was like, the
Yeah.
worst
Yeah.
thing about nachos is they get soggy. So we do a sizzle platter in the middle of this Dover sole handled plate that has fresh chips around it, and we melt the cheese over the chicken or the shrimp or the steak, and then we take it to the table with pickled vegetables and salsa, and then we sauce the cheese table side, right?
Mm.
It's just
Yeah, that's dynamite.
again, it's just kind of like I don't know if people get it or not. I get it because I got fresh chips, I got melted cheese, I got meat, and I got the things that I love, which was inspired by Taco Truck, which is these great pickled carrots that we
Yeah.
now put in with onions and jalapenos and do it as like a pickled salsa fresca almost. But it's um, those were the things where we felt like we could be unique, right? Or
Hmm.
differentiate. I don't even know if it's unique. I think we're just being thoughtful, I think. But we wanted to build a place that was super comfortable, super design forward. It had a vibe, it had energy, it had a feel to it. Um, and but it was something so close to home that a lot of people would find a connection with it. So we
I
hope.
love
Yeah.
it. It sounds amazing, and thank you so much for going into all those details. Like all those little cherries on top, I think are just phenomenal, and they really do. They, like you said, maybe you can't quantify the ROI on it, but you know it's there. Like you
Yeah.
just know in your heart. So very, very, very last question:
Yeah.
what's on the playlist at Scout?
Oh man. So it is dominated by vintage Rolling Stones.
Okay, nice, nice.
Right, dude. It is even the other play. And again, music is something that I wish I had more time to spend on because I obsess over it. But like, I'm glad you brought this up. I think the two things that people often undervalue or in a restaurant because it's such a time consuming thing to do. But the first is lighting, right? Like
Hmm.
I obsess over lighting, and people think I'm crazy because I'll run through the room adjusting it 20 times. But
Hmm.
even though we marked it, I still adjust it, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
It is the thing that's most impactful to me in terms of the feel of the room. And the second is the soundscape, right? Like it creates, it just does, whether you're listening to it or not listening to it, And so we
Hmm.
have a very specific sort of approach to that at Citizen, and there's stylistically what we want people hearing and when they hear it. Time of day matters, right? Like the
Hmm.
energy level of the music and the time of day, and but here because of the retro nature of it, it's like it kept going back to different stuff. But we have one playlist that is nothing but vintage Rolling Stones, and then we have another one that is basically same genre but music that sounds like it, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I probably have Cashmere on that playlist just because Thomas walked into
That
it.
was the entrance music. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
his entrance
remember.
music. I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, double down on this.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's so important. Those things matter, and it's crazy. It's one of the first things I notice in any restaurant is the music level, what the music is, and the lighting level.
Hmm.
I drive my electricians and lighting designers crazy because like the kitchen lights have to dim, right? I have chefs that
Yeah.
hate me because like I can't have the operating room light bleeding into the dining room, and so we literally have everything on a dimmer or some way to mask it because
Right.
it matters. It creates the energy. So
Sure does. Jeremy, this has been fantastic to catch up. I really appreciate your time and all
I
the
wish I could
insights.
have
This
done
has
it in
been,
person, man. I ought to come see you because like you've got two more projects since the last time I was there, and I'm excited to see those. And I think the world of you, man. You do a great job, and I think this is awesome. I appreciate what you're doing. I wish you'd done this about in 2020
yeah.
where I was trying to figure my own stuff out. It would have been great.
Yeah. Yeah. And that would have been the time to sit around and do a podcast, right? When the world had come to a stop.
We had time then, yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're all running in every direction. So
But now we have more stuff to talk about when it comes to
we
opening
do.
restaurants too. So.